Good.
Okay, good evening and welcome to the February edition of the Amherst Affordable Housing Trust. Uh, Pleased to see you all, Alex, EJ, Carla, Bob, and Greg, of course. So why don't we go ahead and jump right into our agenda. Thank you for providing us draft minutes for January, December, and November. So, are there any comments or requests of for modifications of anything in these minutes? Um, well, it is important for us to stay up to date, and I'm really pleased that you were able to get us there. So I wonder if we have a motion to approve the minutes as circulated in the packet.
I'll
Okay,
motion.
we have a second. Okay, thank you, Alex. Okay, maybe we can. I'll just go around quickly then. EJ, we have a motion to approve the minutes.
Aye.
All right, Carla,
I
Bob,
Aye.
Alex.
Aye.
I vote to approve as well. So unanimously passed approving 3 months of minutes. And so that puts us up to date. A nice place to be, Greg. Thank you.
Well, we got to go back some and do some more previous to that, but we're getting
Okay.
started.
All right. Well, we've got good cover. Uh, okay. So next item on our agenda, we are yes. So you'll recall that back in December, we had a guest from the initiative to pass the public banking law. And as you may recall, the public banking initiative, the proposal is basically to take a percentage of the tax proceeds that are held in banks and set them aside for purposes of loaning funds to CDFIs. And I think we had recently considered an initiative, the rent control initiative that I'll note that the mayor of Boston actually just endorsed, interestingly. So that ballot initiative is getting some movement. And I think that there were concerns about, wait, what are the actual boundaries of what kinds of initiatives we might be asked to approve? Can anyone's personal pet initiative show up here and put us all in a position to decide whether we want to vote to approve it or not? And so I, having kind of brought this to us, I retreated and thought about it further. And my proposal that I'd like us to consider to see if it makes sense is to adopt a two-step process for initiatives. I don't think we should kind of cancel our potential voice as a trust and avoid all political endorsements. But I do think that we need a process for deciding what is appropriate for us to be endorsing, and that we shouldn't be kind of figuring it out each time without a process. And so the process I'd like to propose is that we first of all vote on whether any initiative that has been brought to our attention and gets on our agenda, whether we think it's in the bailiwick of in the kind of subject matter domain and falls within the mandate of the trust. And the idea would be that whether you would then go on to vote in favor or against, you can have the view that it is in our. So, for example, I voted against the rent control ballot initiative, but I have no doubt that it's squarely within our mandate to back something like that. And so I'd like to propose that we adopt this process, that whenever we have any such initiative and the possibility of endorsing a political initiative, that the first question for us is this really in our proper scope of what we do and what we pretend to care about? Or is it outside of that? And only if that vote passes do we then have a vote to decide whether we want to endorse it. So we first kind of filter out anything that doesn't fit within, we think doesn't fit within our scope. And so even if we all wanted to endorse this, if it doesn't fall in our scope, we wouldn't endorse it. Conversely, we might all vote against something ultimately, but agree that it is squarely within our mandate. And so those are two different ways that we would not endorse something. We might really love it, but think it's not inside of our bailiwick. And we might not like it, but think it is inside our bailiwick. In either case, we wouldn't be endorsing it. So that's the proposal. Alex, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Just for clarity, are you imagining that these two votes happen like at the same meeting, right after each other?
I think that as a general matter, I'd propose, I think it makes sense to do it in consecutive meetings. With respect to the public banking initiative, I guess since we already discussed it at a prior meeting, I would be open to having a second vote if it were to pass the first vote. But I do think, Alex, that the best way to administer this policy is by doing subsequent votes in separate meetings, so that we don't let the tail wag the dog.
Yeah. Okay. I think that makes sense. Thank you.
Other thoughts about this approach, Bob?
Yeah, just makes sense to me. And the consecutive meetings also make sense just to give us little time to be familiar with the issues. So
Yeah.
yeah, I support this.
Okay. Yeah, and so, you know, I think maybe we should really, if we want to adopt this policy, which is I think the first vote, then I would see if we are open to doing the first vote on the public banking, and then follow our process if it does pass that step, to save an endorsement vote until the March meeting. Carla.
It's kind of, I'm not trying to be wishy-washy, but I think that's a great compromise. And I just think also, just to add, that be mindful of time taken or devoted to these discussions and vote.
Yeah.
It hasn't been onerous thus far, but you know, just to keep in mind for
Yeah.
the future. Um, like I said, I don't even know if that needs to be added
Good.
in any way, but just kind of just a reminder that it's probably less important than some of the other roles that we play, I guess.
Yeah, and so I mean, I guess to spell it out, Carla, the first stage that happens beforehand is whether to put it on the meeting agenda. And so just because I'm currently chair, let's say Hijay brings this initiative to us and says, I'd like to you know, put this before the trust for a possible endorsement. The first step would be Greg and I talking about it and making sure that we think it's a plausible candidate for fitting within our scope. And that's, I guess, the mechanism that we have available, Carla, for addressing what you're concerned with, other than basically finding that your concern is manifesting, and then we need to add further controls. Any other thoughts or comments? So if there aren't, and again, I guess just to more explicitly address Carla's concern, we are never bound by our past decisions. We can always overrule ourselves. So we're not stuck with the rules we make. We're stuck having to talk about and vote on changing the rules that we make. And so with that said, I wonder if anyone is moved to make a motion to adopt this policy, which I would state as before voting to endorse any political initiative, we would first have to vote that the initiative falls within the trust mandate at a prior meeting.
So moved, if you're waiting on a
Okay.
motion.
Do we have a second?
Second. Yep, I'll second.
Okay. Hej.
Sorry, I was trying to second, but these guys are a lot faster than I am.
Yeah, you got to be quicker if you want to get those. If you want to get in the minutes for motions or seconding.
Yes.
It's okay, I can be the gaff reel, I guess.
Well, you can be the first one to vote in favor.
Aye.
All right, Bob,
Yes,
Alex, Carla.
Aye.
Okay, I also vote to approve this policy, and so it has passed unanimously. And so with that done, I wonder if we would want to now consider whether we think this public banking initiative fits within our scope. And I think that it would be perfectly reasonable to think that we need more information and discussion, and I might be able to answer questions, but I might not be able to, and we may not be able to get there. So let me see if you feel like you have enough information to vote on this procedural question of do we think this public banking initiative is close enough or within the scope of our mandate for it to be the kind of thing that we might endorse. Bob?
Yeah, I did a little reading on it, and so I'm inclined to say that it is within our scope. I guess my question is, it's not exclusively about funding CDFIs, as I understand it, or at least not exclusively about funding for housing related things. It's small business as well, but it does also specifically mention how affordable housing as an aim. Is that correct?
Yes, my understanding is that the funding is primarily geared to move through CDFIs, but you're absolutely right that it's not only for housing, and the kind of lead argument for it is supporting small business, especially in underserved communities in the state, and the needs of people in the state, such that it does explicitly contemplate supportive affordable housing, but that is by no means its exclusive focus.
From what I've read, and with that understanding, I think it still does fall within the overall scope. So,
Okay. Other questions or comments on about that, or reactions? I guess I'm wondering whether you feel like you have a view and we're ready to vote on it, or whether you have kind of comments you'd like to discuss or questions that you'd like to ask before you had your own view about that. Carla, Alex, and Hej.
I think
I think initially, oh, sorry, EJ. I kind of think I was the one that expressed some reluctance earlier, but that was partly too because I appreciate the presentation, but I needed more education as well, and I think with a um, wider lens, I can see now how it's, more connected than I kind of understood initially, so that was, in some ways, I think that, that's one of the other benefits of kind of having the two votes, that it gives us a little more time to consider the impact of it. So anyway, even though think I was the original one dragging my feet, I'm tending to think that it does definitely seem within our scope at this point. So
Yeah, thank you, Carla. I mean, and I want to say that I appreciate that you shared your reluctance, because I think it made clear that we did need to operationalize a process for these endorsements. And so I'm happy the way that things have unfolded on that front. Um, Jay, you were gonna.
Mostly, I do agree with what Carla said and what Bob's analysis of this. I think the broader ambitions of the bank is potentially greater than just affordable housing, but clearly affordable housing is a primary directive that this um, aims to help, and that is our main focus. So I think it's directionally aligned, and I'm for it.
Okay. Alex, would you like to make any comments, or I guess I'd also be, if you don't have comments, I'd also be open to a motion from you to on this either way.
No, I just wanted to again extend a thank you to Carla for the invitation to slow down and set some procedure with this. I think it's putting us in a better spot. So I also appreciated the chance to kind of catch myself up on the issue. I agree with what Bob said, that I think it's within our shoes. Be happy to vote on the appropriateness to
Okay, well, I think at this point, given what's been expressed, it's a formality. But let's why don't we get it over with? So could we have a motion to kind of approve the public banking initiative as being within our scope to endorse?
Man, that's a mouthful. Motion to approve this public banking initiative to be within our scope.
Second. Do we have a second? Yes. Okay, second by Bob. Carla,
aye.
Alex,
aye.
Bob,
Aye.
TJ,
Aye.
and I vote to approve, so unanimously. So that will tee up a vote for substantive vote in March. And please do not hesitate to send any question that you may have to Greg, because we can go back to the folks involved in the steering committee of this initiative to give us answers, so that we have the benefit of that information before a substantive vote next time. Thank you very much, and I think we're now ready to take up the efforts that Alex has put in to kind of dust off a process that hasn't been looked at anew in some years. And so looking forward to your presentation. So let's go with that.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay,
And
I'm gonna.
I would like to welcome those in the in the audience. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Great. Okay, can you all see a slideshow? Hopefully, yeah. Great. Okay, so first of all, before I again, a big thank you to Greg for working with me through this process a little bit. So this presentation won't take super long. I'm hoping much more of our meeting can be spent actually in discussion about the contents. I know you all haven't had a long time to review the draft application that was sent today. We're certainly not looking for any major vote or action today. There's like a specific ask at the end that I'll get to, but just some background first to make sure that we've all level set and are kind of on the same page. So our current application that the trust hasn't been overly utilized. It predates my time on the trust, and it also predates the creation of our action plan. So it's a really great starting point, but since it's been adopted, there's been a lot of change in the view of what the trust can and should be funding and the scale of those. We also have more experience providing funding to projects. And right now, none of that experience is really captured in the application process. So I think right now is the time to start this process of refining an application. We have some folks with some institutional knowledge and time now, and we also have a fairly manageable pipeline at the moment. We're also looking at hopefully an increased financial position in the coming years. So setting some precedent and infrastructure, I think, is really important. So the goal for this application is to directly tie what we're doing to our action plan and our charge, but also to find a balance between flexibility and prescriptiveness in terms of how we hear and consider projects. So the general application process that I've laid out with Greg's help is a unified part 1 and part 2 application that a person interested in receiving trust funds or trust support would submit directly to staff. That would enable staff to meet with that applicant, help them through a revision process as necessary until they make the professional determination that it's at a fleshed out enough spot to come before the whole trust. And then it would involve the staff member coming to the trust with a motion. So that motion could look like lots of things. It could look like just a motion to fund the project, or for larger projects, or more realistically, it's probably a motion to add them to the agenda at future meetings or a future meeting that starts to lay out kind of that process. Hopefully that provides a chance to smooth out the application process for applicants, but also make sure we're capturing the voice and expertise of our professional staff as we're going through the review process. So part 1 is fairly simple. Actually, it's the first couple pages of that document. It's a questionnaire that people walk through and then plug their answers into this memo that they would provide in writing. So kind of like Mad Lib style. It would be standardized. Everybody would submit this. All the information should be appropriate and applicable to every type of project. So there shouldn't be any like not available moments on there. And that's fairly straightforward. The slightly more complicated part of it involves self-assigning type and class classifications to projects. So let's walk through in part 1 of the application. But it would basically self-select which typology their project go under, and these number systems align with our action plan. So it's strong connections between what we've identified as our priorities and the reasons people can apply for funding to us. Our action plan is a little stacked strangely for this, which is why we have 2 and 3 intentionally left blank and a lot of subtypes under 1, but it connects to those large bullets on our action plan for what we're trying to do. What I wanted to spend more time talking about today was this idea of classification. So to jump forward for just a second, the goal with the way this is framed right now, which isn't how it has to remain, is that somebody, as they fill out this declaration, could identify their project by type and class. And then from this matrix at the back from table 3, it would tell them what we were looking for them to submit along with their application that is specific to their project. So the types are a little more intuitive. The idea of the classes is varying levels of intensity. So if somebody's asking for something that we determine to be a less intense project, either because there are fewer moving pieces, or the funding stack is simpler, or it's a smaller overall ask, or any other number of reasons, it would allow us to upfront ask less from them and hopefully allow us to continue to be really nimble and flexible and respond in a timely manner to proposals without setting a really low bar for larger projects or projects we want. So this is kind of a sliding intensity scale of what we're asking for upfront and how far along in the process we want people to be before. Um, so the classification right now is set up kind of like a tax return deduction form in terms of like you do some basic math and then it tells you kind of what bucket you fall into. But that's the thing to mostly talk about today. So I think this needs to be a longer process to make sure we have time to really be thoughtful and approach building an application that works for us and is going to work for our applicants. I know this is, like I said, a lot of you all haven't seen it before today. So I'm happy to start with just some general questions and feedback on the format. And then if we feel like it's appropriate and we're ready today, we can jump into a discussion for kind of the classification system, looking towards one of these three outcomes. So either just generally assenting that, yes, this is a direction that's worth exploring, and that would help me know as I continue to develop this with Greg's help that this is something that's worth spending time on, or asking for a pause, which is fine if other folks have other ideas about how to approach this and want to wait till next month's meeting where they can come back with their own kind of proposal. If people feel really strongly against this, that's okay too. Just having some direction coming out of today would be awesome, but still thinking about this through a longer term lens in terms of making sure we get this up and running before we need it, but also not rushing ourselves. So I'm happy to stop there and take questions if folks have questions, and then we'll go from there.
Good. Who wants to start the questions? The question, my question is what, when we look at the kinds of projects that have come to us, and I guess a small scale project was the house that we helped a teacher buy with a $25,000 grant because the prices had gone up so fast and what had been affordable became unaffordable by a margin that we could close with a relatively small grant. And then we've got the larger, Amherst Community Homes, Wayfinders projects at the other end of the scale. And so with those examples, what are the deficiencies of the existing one-size-fits-all process?
Yeah. So to start with, I think that our current application doesn't really capture necessarily either of those project types super well, just from a type standpoint. As we've become a little more ambitious and creative in how we're looking to fund projects, things like one-time grants, things like soft debt, these aren't really set up well within our original application, by my view, at least. I don't think it gives people a chance to really make a strong case for even something like that one-time grant request within our original application. In terms of the other larger problem that the kind of bucketing classification is trying to solve, I think to me, it's thinking about how we respond to scale. Because right now we have a one-size-fits-all application, which means in theory, we should be requesting the exact same supporting documentation from every applicant, regardless of the facts of their case. And we might choose to waive some of that as a trust, and we have that ability right now. But as we're thinking about establishing precedent and long-term process and procedure, that's what we're setting ourselves up for. Thinking about just in the last couple of months, the projects that we've heard about that have come to us either in a formal or informal capacity, that doesn't feel like that's necessarily going to serve us well moving forward.
And if I can just follow up before handing the question over to Hijay, what are the specific kinds of documents or information that we would or wouldn't require, and that the categorization would I guess in effect, give a preliminary default answer to the question of what the trust needs for the given project.
Yeah, I think that's a bit of a moving target and will become a little more clear once we decide on if we're moving forward with the classification scheme, and
Yeah.
if so, what we're weighting more heavily in that. The draft that you all have has an example that's assuming that basically the major factor we're considering is the cost of the project, the cost to the trust, rather. Um, and thinking about kind of that sliding scale of that. Um, but there's also other factors that we could consider in terms of how experienced of a developer they are. If we have a working relationship with them, I think there are other things that could be captured. And depending on what categories we end up considering, it's going to change what we're asking for. But a rough idea of like for a fairly small project that's home purchase and rehabilitation, but a very small scale project where it's like one structure and a known amount of work, we might not really need formal construction documents and a full pro forma stack. We might be comfortable moving forward without that. But if somebody's talking about a much larger scale purchase and rehabilitation, those are probably things we're going to want.
Okay, thank you, Alex. TJ.
Yeah, and I was wondering, certain projects like there's not just a cost scale to it, but maybe like a timeliness scale to it. Like one of the advantages that the trust has is that our funding is ambiguous in terms of like when exactly funding can be applied, right? So I'm wondering if this can be a vehicle to also bring forward projects that are relatively lightweight, doesn't have to be brought through the big whole rigmarole, but also maybe it's a more pressing need that needs to be discussed on a shorter time scale basis, and if we could apply some efficiencies, that could be hopeful, more beneficial. Less of a
That's
question, but
certainly,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, that's certainly the hope. I think the other important piece of this that I want to highlight again is that the application would go through a filter before it made it the full trust. That filter being our professional staff making a recommendation. And I think that is also meant to help with that efficiency and timeliness and understanding that we and our successors as members of the public not be fully educated on the nuances of construction financing and construction schedules. But we have professional staff who are much more can provide some context listening when they move forward with application to help us think different.
Carla. Oh, yeah, you muted still.
Sorry. Um, I was so focused on lowering my hand, I didn't want to can't do two things at once. Um, so I think my question is kind of related to both what Alex and HJ were talking about, but just I appreciate that like the differentiating like the different projects and I like, and the guidance to like what you referred to as, the Mad Libs, helping answering questions in a more simplified way. I think I'm just wondering, and maybe this would be part of what the professional staff would be part of, is like just making sure that it is accessible to some of those smaller projects who like, when you think of one of the bigger projects, they might have like a lawyer or someone who can kind of look at all these paperwork and not be overwhelmed as opposed to someone who maybe isn't as educated or I don't know. I don't know if I'm being clear in how I'm asking it, but you know what I mean? Just making sure that it's not overwhelming, that it's still accessible and welcoming, I guess. It's hard to say that about a municipal forum about
Yeah,
finances, but you know what I mean? So and I guess there would always be, I imagine if someone is asking for help that uh, Greg is there to maybe give them some guidance about the wording of it or I don't know, but anyway.
yeah.
Uh,
No, I completely agree that that's something we should remain focused on as we move through this process. In my view, I think the bucketing approach allows us to do that a little bit more to respond to scale and size appropriately. Greg, I'm not sure if you have more to.
Um, if I may just jump in to say that the structure doesn't have to be on the surface. In other words, we can be more like a one of those like Venus flytraps where we try to pull in very easily and then we tell them this is what we think we need. But that first stage is just we're really excited to hear from you, submit an expression of interest, and then professional staff will kind of help you figure out what we would need for a viable presentation application. That so the back end work that Alex has done can structure the process without necessarily being on the surface potentially. I'm just kind of trying to process out loud here. EJ, please.
I totally thought that Bob still had his hand up. Um, the only corollary, the only counterpoint that I can think of, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here, by the way, I think this is a great idea, is that I'm kind of curious if the types of projects that we could expect, are there types of projects that we could maybe like we might not cover well enough in this format. Like if there's a template for everything, and then all of a sudden yet we're throwing a curveball. How does that cover? And I think that's really the only the off the top of my head, the only consideration that I can think of. It's a little bit different.
Yeah, no, I think that's important to keep in mind. We obviously can't predict the future in every type of project we're going to get. That was the hope in structuring this around the action plan is these are projects we know that we'd be interested in funding. There is like an other category right now in terms of typology, which we can certainly maintain. And I also want to stress some of what Gaston was saying, that this is meant to be a baseline that we can modify as needed. So either on a per project basis or just overall, we can revise the application as we need to. And I think we should plan on doing that anyway, whenever we update our action plan and make sure it's in alignment. But if a project came to us and we had asked for a set of documents and for some reason it wasn't feasible or appropriate for that, I think there's very much a way we can build that into the process where they can write a written just like a letter saying, hey, this is why we don't think this is appropriate, or even through a conversation with professional staff, and we can waive that requirement as a trust. Or we can ask.
Good. By the way, Alex, your mic is kind of picking up less well and kind of in and out a little bit. The thought I'm having is that the structure can kind of suggest that by default, this is what you would expect to be required to put together a full application, but those requirements might be waived and others may be added so that, but what I think is very helpful that we haven't really done at all is to position proposals as connecting directly to our strategy and as therefore almost and kind of shaping how we evaluate any given proposal. We've kind of taken them all as sui generis, whereas we should start to think when it comes to a small emergency needs type of application, here's what we should be thinking about as a trust. In other words, the corollary of this effort is to start to sharpen our own sense of what makes applications meritorious so that we don't feel like we're shooting from the hip every time. Bob?
Yeah, that all makes sense. I had my hand up earlier, but then you said exactly what I was thinking of in terms of, first of all, an expression of interest. So, looking at the application, the draft, thank you very much, Alex, as it is now, it's more involved in maybe at the somewhat later stage, but getting that sort of initial expression of interest, which the professional staff could do an initial read on. And then if we have this sort of templates by type or whatever of the documents that are needed, that would seem to be a good approach. And yeah, I think in terms of sort of internal way of tying this to what our action plan is just, for any proposal that we look at, maybe a first step is, which point does this germane to? And then go on from there.
And
Yeah.
I guess maybe like Carla, the part that put me most on alert, maybe it's just, past trauma, was the like write one if it's this or one if it's that. And I guess I'm curious if really in what I see is that maybe there's a few kinds of requests, and each of those kinds of requests might have a different scale. So if that's right, then it would be more a matter of spelling out in the matrix what are the default requirements, as opposed to what I may be misreading, but I see that the method that you're proposing tries to create categories based on two functions. And it might be easier to process by just having that grid of different types at different scales, because each type has its own demands. But again, I may not have gotten yet what you were proposing, Alex. So I wonder if the rambling I'm doing, maybe you could show us on the slides and explain it better to me, given my doubts.
Yeah, happy to. Let me see if I can get on this slideshow. Okay, so I'm gonna pull up the draft application that you all saw. There haven't been edits made to this since the version that went out in your packet, but just for ease of looking at. So we'll start with, I think, the matrix, just to make sure that we're kind of on the same page. So the hope is that every project will have a type and a classification. The method for determining classification would be consistent across projects. Requirements would be different based on project type. So
Okay.
I know I only showed the top couple on the slide because I think that's what Greg had populated a little more in terms of thoughts of what to show. I think that every type of initiative would have these different categories of Class A, Class B, Class C. In terms of determining the categories, it is set up right now in the direction I was moving in, which can obviously change, is that you go through the same questionnaire to determine classification regardless of project type. So it's still asking the same questions that should be relevant regardless of what type of project you're talking about, that are focusing on the funding details, funding stack, and experience of developer. So I'm certainly open to changes in approach, or more narrowly just massaging the actual calculations here. But the thought is that everybody hits this form with the same information, regardless of the project they're posting.
Now, could you just zoom a little bit?
I guess what I guess what I haven't pieced together yet is why, if let's say your answer to J is yes, all funds have already been committed, no, all funds haven't been committed, why doesn't your answer to that question just have a direct implication, period, without having to get funneled through some additional class or category?
Ah, okay. I think I understand what you're asking. So, um, I think there are several different factors that I'm trying to capture with how the classification is set up right now. So your response to that would have a direct impact, but it would be mitigated by your other responses to it. So as it's set up right now, you basically earn points in this top section, this like A through F. You gain points and then you lose points in the bottom section. The thought being that if you have a larger proposal, but you're a developer who's done similar projects, other sources are providing most of the funds, and or we've worked with you before, that kind of offsets the amount of upfront work we're requiring of that person in light of those factors. So I'm not sure if that clarifies it or makes it more
Well,
confusing. Just on.
I think it just makes me more skeptical that I'm just skeptical that these numbers are really meaningful as opposed to more of a kind of decision tree type of setup. Like if X, then Y. If R, then S, as opposed to if X plus R, then Z. I'm not seeing the X and the R as being commensurate and commensurable.
So certainly that's something we can discuss and work through as a trust. If we'd like the general idea of the bucketing, but aren't happy with this proposal, I'm very happy to hear other people's ideas on that. In terms of the actual mechanics of this kind of additive form as opposed to a decision tree, a lot of that is stemming from the fact that I don't know what format this final application will take. I'm assuming that for now it would be a paper form. I don't think that's feasible or the direction we'd move in, but I don't know the limitations around electronic hosting of it. So things like decision trees can be fairly difficult to have people work through paper with the hope that this is a little simpler. Uh, that also can change as we learn more about what our hosting capabilities.
Bob.
Yeah, I also have some skepticism or some questions about the value of an additive kind of formula. If we had 20 applications coming in a year and we needed to sort of rank them against each other, I just sense that it's going to be the qualitative measures that are going to, I mean, yes, we need to get some basic things in terms of overall scope and cost and so on, but I suspect that the decisions are going to be um, more complex, and I'm not sure that just adding numerically like that is going to have value. Um, yeah, just some thoughts.
Yeah, thank you for that. So just to make sure that being clear on this, because I think I'm probably not, the hope behind this additive value is not necessarily to rank projects against each other. It's to determine how we are viewing the intensity of the project, which has nothing to do with a merit judgment. It has to do with this level of intensity we are asking for in the original application. So just because one project gets a higher score than or a like higher numeric on this than another doesn't actually involve us evaluating them against each other at all. It just, as you can see down here at the bottom, helps them determine what level of intensity we are going to be viewing their project with, which all that impacts is what we're asking for in terms of support material.
Yeah,
So this is not
let's
meant to replace our qualitative judgment. This is to
Mhm.
help us guide the applicants through a process to get us the information we're probably going to be asking for anyway upfront.
And is it the intensity of the initiative that dictates what requirements, or something else that, the type? Well, I guess you have got both there in terms of what sorts of documentation and we're going to ask for.
Yeah, so it's both. It's the type and the
Okay.
intensity. So
Okay.
that score up of the score up above, the additive factor up here would come out to either A, B, or C, depending on its value. And then you would come down to this matrix, find the classification and the typology of your project, and then your application would live in one of these squares, and that would identify what we're actually asking
Okay. And I guess the last question I would have then is that the applicant that is having to say, okay, this is where the classification is, or is it really the staff that's going to make that, decide whether it's A, B, or C?
for. I think it starts with the applicant, just from a clarity and transparency standpoint of let them know how we're considering it and asking them to kind of self-identify. I think certainly staff would have the final say on that. And might review the data and say, I don't think that's appropriate. I think we need to be looking at a different classification. But the hope is that it would start with the applicant, so they could see when they fill this out what information.
Okay, thanks.
Greg, you want a clarification or have Carlos' question?
What should go to Carla? I think we're kind of past what I was going to say.
Okay.
All right.
I just this is a really basic question. Could you clarify exactly what you mean by intensity, Alex?
Yeah. Well, yes and no. I'm happy to clarify it as I intended it here, but I was also hoping that was some of what we could work towards consensus on. So I was thinking that we probably were going to consider a combination of factors, including the cost of the overall project, the amount of funding that the applicant is requesting from us, the experience of the applicant, like how many other projects they've done, and if they've worked with us before, um, and commitment of funds from other people. So the thinking being, obviously, we have a financial responsibility to be more thorough with larger expenditures to single spots. But also, we have a responsibility to be always thorough, but to really be careful when we're working with new parties. That's great. We welcome applications from folks we haven't worked from before, but we're going to have a different relationship with them, and we might be looking for different things since we don't know them as well. And thinking about the percentage of the funding stack that's coming from us. Because if we're just providing gap funding, then maybe we don't need as extensive of information because this has been vetted by other organizations that have already committed funding. If we're this like primary funder or the sole funder of something, then there's a lot more that we're going to need to see because if we don't review it, nobody. Does that clarify it a little bit, Carla?
Greg.
Yeah, sorry, my hand was still up, but I can maybe add something here. I think, the part of the advantage to this approach, not necessarily the sort of tax return method here, or a decision tree would be another way to come at it. But is some sort of framework that accommodates both both a very large development and very small development, an ask that comes at the end of a process, a la our second investment into Amherst Community Homes, which was a deal that was very well vetted and understood and just had a gap, versus perhaps our first one, which was when they were very early in the process. Or and so so intensity doesn't have one definition in that sense, because if we're if it's a relatively modest amount of money, but we are the primary equity investor, then perhaps there's an obligation to have a more intensive review process. That same amount could be early money for a much larger project. In that scenario, it might be more appropriate to have a more modest process. So I think what the attempt is here is to capture sort of all those different categories in one tool, and then the outgrowth perhaps of this is so of these buckets. Then perhaps there are more explicit criteria we can begin to develop within those buckets. But as Alex noted, those would be specifically separate from this, which is more just a categorization exercise. That's kind of, yeah.
I guess I'll just say I'm not really comfortable with this process at all. This idea of adding up these different points. I think that the question of what documents we expect is an important one, and we have a list of the kinds of things that we require, and the question is, are there any reasons why any of those aren't required for the project in question? Whether we're in a position to kind of predict in advance, I don't know. I don't know how well positioned we are to determine in advance that we don't need this or we do need that before we've seen the project. Other than saying these are the kinds of things that we normally look for, and you should be prepared to provide these. If you think any of these aren't appropriate, tell us why.
I, yeah, I think there's merit to what you're saying. I don't necessarily agree with it. I understand where you're coming from with that. I think part of it is a question of how we want this process to evolve and at what point and at what level of polish we want to interact with applicants. So from my understanding, what you're proposing or suggesting is closer to what we've been doing, which potentially can result in a much longer process if we're asking people to start to fill out an application, prepare all of this documentation that for most projects might include things we don't necessarily need or might not include everything we need.
Yeah.
Present to us, then we
Yeah.
provide feedback and say, actually, we want this, we don't want that. And it might drag out the process. So I think that's important to think through the mechanics of what that looks like from an applicant viewpoint.
Yeah. So, I mean, I understand that this is a way of trying to revisit the experience that we've had with ACLT now, right? And so we've learned a lot by working with ACLT, and we have learned about ways that we want to be demanding that we weren't clear at the front end that we'd want to be demanding. And so it's important not to have to go in that direction. In other words, what drags on a process is to realize that you want more than you asked for at the beginning. My sense is that if people know we're looking for all these things, but there might be reasons why those aren't critical, that's an easy conversation for the proposer to have with Greg. And Greg can reason about it and say, yeah, you're right. For this, given this or given that, why don't you go ahead and focus on these items? And making a judgment call about what we won't need. The discovery, as I see it with ACLT, was we actually want a lot of things that they weren't giving us, and that we weren't clear that we were going to demand, over the course of the 4 or 5 months that we were talking to them. And so the issue was more spelling out requirements than it was waiving requirements. Yeah, Alex, please.
Yeah, I worry that if we skew too far towards here's our set list of requirements, and you essentially need to petition individually to have things removed, we're going to lose some potentially really important small scale projects.
We've never lost we don't lose projects, we just don't get them started. So I think we need to be much more concrete about what specific kinds of projects we're worried about.
I agree with that. I just don't want us to set the burden of application so high people feel like they can't approach us. I'm thinking about the scenario of homeowner who might be interested in grant for an affordable ADU, for instance, which would be a really small scale project.
Yeah.
A lot of things we would ask for from formal developers, they're just not going to or have access to, and I'm afraid they'd never apply.
Right, and we're going to have a specific call for proposal for that specifies the lower requirements, Alex, when we're ready to do that. So I don't expect that someone who's we figured out how to support ADUs, they're not going to go through the standard application that Wayfinders uses. We're going to have something that's designed for that kind of proposal in order to avoid the to spur applications. So let me let you respond before taking more questions.
No, I'd love to hear other people's
Yeah, EJ.
thoughts.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like a good way to phrase this. I am also concerned that we won't get the math right, essentially. Um, which is obviously something that just takes time to work on, and not saying it's just an anxiety. But at the same time, maybe it helps to work through like a case to see how this actually is playing out, rather than dismissing one way or another. So I think a real example that maybe the trust is a little bit more there's a little bit more history of understanding how that process unfolded, and see how a process like this could have changed the course of how it was approached. It would be an interesting way to at least ascertain a little bit more information. Right now, we're sort of on two sides of the fence, and I'm not confident that we will really be able to understand the impact of something like this without some sort of case study, to be honest. I don't know how feasible that is, but that's just how my brain is thinking right now.
Bob.
Yeah, I'm just thinking back to sort of that two-stage process where I'd like to see something, just a very accessible sort of web form as an expression of interest, and then having some sort of just checklist of different documentations that may be required and could be in response to an expression of interest, something that Greg or uh, subset or whatever could give an initial view on, these may not be required, but it's not a formal application at that point. So it's gathering the expression of interest in a way that's going to be welcoming and accessible, and then providing a list of documentation that may be required. And then at the next step, sort of tuning that. And then, the application can be just really the application for funding, that is essentially, and that could be sort of more formal and have all the documentation attached to it. But maybe something like a phased approach to that uh, could be worthwhile.
So trying to build on that, Bob. So the initial is like, I want to do this. I think it'll cost this much. And then the discussion with us the first time they come to our meeting is basically to figure out what it is that we really need to consider before we could approve.
Yeah, or maybe even just before they come to us, that stage where they're talking with Greg um, to get an initial read on whether it can be put onto the agenda or not.
So I guess right is our biggest concern um having people feel that they have to put together a lot of information, or that they do put in a lot of information, or which way do we want our trigger to be, light or heavy? EJ.
Just out of curiosity, do we have a throughput issue in terms of like processing? Is it the yeah like kind of along the same lines, Gaston? I think you were raising basically. Am I understanding the question you're posing is, are we concerned about the process being too lengthy because of unintended asks that we add on, or are we concerned about like getting applications into our pile? I'm sort of hearing two things as well.
Yeah, Alex.
Yeah. In my view, I think we have room to grow in both areas. I think that right now our application process is not overly clear nor applicable to a lot of different project types. So I think it's highly possible that we're missing some applications altogether, that there are initiatives we could be funding that aren't even coming before us. Um, and then I also think that even if somebody is coming to us for funding right now, such an inconsistent bar in terms of what we're asking for. So they don't really know at the beginning of the process at this point, which I think is also slowing down the process and potentially discouraging people from applying as well.
Carla.
Maybe because since I'm new-ish to the board, I feel like I was still learning a lot of the process while the ACLT was being presented to us. So maybe as like a mini case study, or Alex, could you speak to how you think this form would have helped or improved that process? It doesn't have to be lengthy. I'm just curious, like how this kind of way of organizing it may have made that better or streamlined it or helped prevent any confusion.
Yeah, I'll start and I'm happy to have Greg pipe in at any moment with anything. Um, I agree that we all have learned a lot through the ACLT process in terms of materials we actually wanted to see in this case. I also think that's a different approach than we've taken when interacting with ACLT before, which admittedly was before my time as well. But there was something about the intensity and style of what they were doing in this proposal versus in previous proposals that caused us to ask for a fairly different set of documents, which while they were both, I think, appropriate to project type, really was, I think, a missed opportunity to be more clear up front in terms of, if you're thinking about this, this is probably what we want. This is not a hard and fast list. This could still be modified, like I said at the beginning, either systemically or on a case by case basis. But I think that if we had been able to provide more lead time to ACLT in this case with some of the things we ended up asking for, but waited several months to coherently ask for, we might be in a different spot in terms of um, that project. I don't know if it would have impacted overall like timeline of that project, but I think it could have impacted our internal timeline of how we reviewed it. Greg.
Greg.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think, speaking kind of trying to stay in my lane from the staff perspective here, I think perhaps what it would have provided is what this framework, evolved and completed, which it's not yet, but what would provide was a clear juncture and directive to me for like when is it appropriate to forward an application on to the trust. What are the standards? I could as staff be empowered to acquire before we put it on the agenda in the first meeting. So that might have I don't know if it would have changed the ACLT timeline on their end, but perhaps it would have changed the time that we spent in trust meetings on it.
Um, just thinking about the ACLT versus Wayfinder. So sorry, TJ, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry for butting in. For the ACLT specifically, it was actually interesting, but basically it came down to our inability to basically be lien holders. That we took that portion out of the proposal, and I don't know if it's just like something that if we're not going to build that vehicle into our ability to fund, I mean, like that's already something that we would just ask to not put in applications for going forward. It's not really a money thing. It was really like the complexity of dealing with how that would actually be processed that ultimately made that decision. So maybe that's a little bit closer to what the documents really should end up being. It is maybe worth also just seeing how many of the documents we asked for, but it really wasn't that key to the decision-making process. Maybe that's a way to maybe that's also a focus area we could do here. Because I've been in tons of these similar types of discussions where we ask a ton of things and it wasn't really that material at the end of the day. So it is a good lesson learned we can do, but maybe the way in which we're sort of reacting to it could actually swing it, unfortunately, somewhat in a different direction that could be just as complex. So just an awareness thing here.
Alex.
Yeah, I do want to invite us all to think about complexity and at what point it's helpful as opposed to helpful. We're all appointed for fairly short terms in terms of actual project life cycle. And the trust is a fairly young body of town government in the like big picture of things in the town's history. So as we think through what we're doing today, I think it's worth trying to keep some complexity out of it, but also remembering that if we don't have some form of criteria, some form of like intentional precedent that we're setting now, it can put us in a difficult spot later on. So far, we've thankfully been in a position, at least since I've been on the trust, where we've mostly been able to meet funding requests as they come in, which is great. Also, per our own action plan, we would love to see a lot of applications in the future, and we might end up in a spot where we need to be more procedural about things and don't have the time or the capacity to take it as case by case. Well, I understand the pushback against complexity. I understand the concerns about getting it wrong now in terms of the math and how much we're classifying it and if we're classifying it. I just do want to encourage us all to think about the future and the implications of whatever we decide here, how it's setting up not only the trust while we're on it, but the trust after we're all off of it as well.
I would like us to try to articulate the kinds of proposals we want and what we require for each of those kinds of proposals. So for a smaller proposal to expand a home in such a way, we need this. For the traditional large development project, we've got a long list of things we need. And I think that it's feasible to approach it that way, from the kinds of proposals that we want. And for each category, here's what we will typically require to give appropriate consideration. And I think that information is basically the backbone of your draft. I would like it to be more straightforward from here's for this kind of proposal, we want these kind of proposals, here's what we need. We want these other kind of proposals, here's what we'll need. And I think that that's a feasible approach. Alex?
Yeah, I would love some clarity from you on that case then, how you think we should be classifying and separating types of proposals. Because you mentioned like a small proposal and a large proposal of various types. So how do you think we should be breaking that down then to provide?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you've done a lot of thinking on this. So can you pull up your draft so we can look at it? Kind of, I think we can reverse engineer it from the work you've done. I mean, so from the very top of it, we've got like the types. So what are the basic types that you identified? So emergency assistance, that's its own type. And I think we need to, if we want to get emergency assistance applications from anyone other than the entities that have come to us for rental type support, I think we need to put out a call. We need to put out a call for proposals. And so, I don't know, what do we contemplate in the category of emergency assistance is a question. that um, I'm not sure that we know. I think we want to be positioned to do it, but we haven't spelled out what kind of proposals we want in the realm of emergency assistance, have we?
No, to my knowledge, we haven't. It's something we've discussed before,
Yeah,
and actually the trust was divided on based on the fact that we hadn't fully fleshed out our views on it. Um,
and
it-
we looks like we're going to get. I mean, we're on track to get meaningful funds from the CPA that we can peg to this. And so I think that's one of the task forces or subcommittees that we need to push forward is a call for proposals for emergency assistance, for example. Carla.
And I originally was like I was going to be working with Rob on that, and then that kind of
Yep.
fell off. Just, I mean, I'm still very interested in, working on that and being a part of a working group or subcommittee, but agreed that there's not enough clarity there. But yeah, anyway, just wanted to.
So I think that on the emergency assistance, we need to put in much more work to solicit proposals, and in doing so, get clear about it. Development has been our bread and butter, and um, I guess all of our grants have been for development, other than some rental assistance and I guess purchase assistance. If we think of that house that we helped to buy, and so putting the rental assistance in the emergency assistance bucket, this kind of supporting the purchase of an affordable home, I think that that's a category that we should decide, do we want to do more of that? And we should put out a call for proposals. I really would like us to be, I think we need to get more proposals, and a call for proposals for supporting the purchase of a home that's going to be locked into affordable ownership or rent over some period of time. We can be pretty specific about what we need for that kind of proposal.
I agree that a call for proposal can be worth pursuing. I do think it's important to stress that emergencies don't always wait on funding cycles. And if we adopt a model of we won't consider things unless we issue a call for proposals with specific criteria,
No, I'm not.
I think we're
I'm not
again,
proposing that at all. No, I'm proposing that we add call for proposal. We're open for business.
then I mean, I'm open to that. I don't think that gets around the point of we still need to figure out how we're asking people to apply. And we currently don't have an application that's set up to really hear.
DJ.
Sorry, unmuted myself like a million times. Um, okay. I think I'm gonna try to translate what I'm hearing from Gaston. And I do agree with what Gaston is basically saying. I think the view here is that we need to define um like how we can actually help by thinking through the process and actually largely think through how much money we can actually like. I'm thinking the overall budget, like one of the things I struggle with the ACLT project was really understanding like how much is this going to basically pigeonhole us later down the line and you know hurt our ability to do any sort of like emergency assistance help. Like these initiatives, you do need to pre-think through, okay, we're going to set aside this much budget. This is our ability to actually help. And then this is how like we need this information from the applicants to be able to at least consider for how much of the portion of the budget that we're thinking about. And I think that's a good way to kind of like make sure that we're able to be responsibly spending what is a rather good sized budget that we have without really feeling like we're basically putting all of our eggs in one giant bucket just because the application happened to come first. It just gives a little bit of safety net overall when we think about it because our funding cycles, as you guys have pointed out, it's just sporadic. We just have to react to whatever is coming at us at the time. It's just putting a little bit of a break, just to kind of give us a little bit of guidelines. Does this kind of fit the bucket of things that we have determined that we can actually do? And that clarity is actually what I think would drive efficiency as well. Because if it's just a no-brainer, it will get funded pretty easily. It's the gray area that we need to define a little bit better along the way. But understanding some of these guidelines would, I think, just overall help. How did I do, Gaston? Was that kind of
Yeah. I mean, the idea of having kind of budgets for different sorts of things is what structured our proposal to the CPA. And it looks like the CPA voted on, what was it, 325, Greg? Yep. And so that supports both some emergency assistance and also the kind of ecosystem initiatives. And so if we use those buckets, then we kind of are in the business for proposals for those two buckets. And then our existing budget can be pegged towards development at different tiers, but we could further, subdivide that in our intention, or more formally, to facilitate what you're saying. I guess the part that I'm most convinced about is the need for us to explicitly tell the community we want these kinds of proposals, and be specific, and especially smaller proposals that we haven't historically gotten too many of. I think we need to be explicit to the community that we're open for business, and here's what we would love to fund, and here's what we are looking for in a proposal. Bob?
I think one of those would be ADUs. And I think also some pre-development and development. So we could separate those out. Another basic distinction within development, could we separate as homeownership versus rental development as two basic? I know there can be crossover and projects can shift, but that would seem to be one. And then I'm also just sort of thinking about, who is submitting the proposal? Is it a developer? Is it a homeowner? Do we want proposals from both? I don't fully have my head wrapped around that, but for ADUs, for example, it could be homeowner who's submitting that, and if we're doing some outreach on that. But those are just some initial thoughts.
I guess I'm wondering, as a matter of workflow among our group here, can we target the outcomes and process that Alex has given so much thought to here? Can we package that with work on these calls for proposals? So can we try to kind of break the world of the kinds of applications we'd love to see down, and have the call for proposals with the requirements as one kind of thought process, as one effort from the each of us, or in groups of us? Can we take this momentum that we're getting tonight and direct it to matching the application requirements with the calls for application that we'd like to put out there?
yes?
Yeah, it means, so for example, to operationalize this, Bob and I have been working with Greg on the more ecosystem and ADU stuff, but a proposal that jumps to my mind would be to say, Carla, could you and Alex work on the emergency assistance call, and what that would, what are we looking for, and what would an application require to get in front of us? for example. Greg.
Yeah, responding to your question, I mean, I think certainly some of this could happen as a sort of draft kind of thought exercise, like back of the envelope type stuff. But I think at some point in the process, some sort of more formal budgeting would probably be key in order to bucket these different things, so we know, because I think what Alex has sort of proposed here is really not so much about merits of projects as it is soundness of applications. But I don't know that we have, and then we've heard members come back to this a few different times. We don't necessarily have uh, detailed criteria on merit. Um, and part of that would be, we like, supportive housing more than ADUs, or some value statement like that. So I think that's a remaining piece too, I think, before um, a launch, but I just want to sort of insert that.
Right. So
Yeah.
indeed, I think that the kind of merit is baked into the notion of a call for proposals. But you're right. And I mean, it's helpful that you framed it as the soundness of the application is what Alex's draft works to make very explicit, is what makes an application sound. And I think that the difficulty of the endeavor is our lack of clarity about the different kinds of proposals that we're open to taking in. Alex.
Yeah. So I guess I'm kind of left with this big question. Um, as we determine what we want for application material for projects, we going to treat all projects of the same type the same way? We going to ask for the same materials, $4 million development that we're going to ask for from a $50,000 development? If that's the direction we're moving in, I think we can certainly start drafting what we want to see in terms of development, rental, ownership, like these different categories. If we're not, I think I'm still left with this question of how are we making a determination or an initial determination of how we determine what we're
What
asking
is a
for?
what is a $50,000 development project? Have we ever seen that? What does that look like?
We haven't, but I'm trying to be expansive to think about what we could see, right? So the idea that somebody might come to us asking for $50,000 for gap funding,
Yeah.
because between when they originally put their funding stack together and when they go to actually sign a contract, prices have gone up, and that's
Right.
the piece of funding that's missing.
Right. And
Do we want to hold
we
that to
handled
the
that
same
very
level
well.
of, and do we want to hold that to the same level of rigor review and application as a person asking for $4 million to develop 200 affordable units?
I mean, no, and we haven't, and we wouldn't, and the requirements wouldn't make any sense.
Right. So I guess I'm left with this question of, are we upfront telling them we understand your project's going to be different because of scale? Or are we saying, here's what we want, and then making them meet with somebody to say, actually, we don't want these things?
Well, I think scale is a little is not as useful a word as proposal type. In other words, scale is the difference between Amherst Community Homes building, asking us for $500,000 or Beacon asking for $8 million. I don't know if there's much difference at all in what we'd require. I don't think scale makes any difference at that level. When we're at a $50,000 project, it's not about scale. It's a whole different ball of wax. And if we want that kind of proposal, I mean, ACLT came to us because they have a common board member. I mean, Rob recused himself, but he sent them to us. And we were game. I was perplexed by the proposal. We had the founder, John, saying this is a great proposal and we all were persuaded. And do we want to fund more gap funding? I think we should put out a call if that's what we want to do, and be very specific about what we need. But the list of criteria for a developer just don't make any sense in that context. They couldn't produce those things because they don't even apply. Greg? TJ?
I think I think our ambitions are really wide and broad, and what we want to solve all the things that we can hope to solve. But I'm sensing that maybe it is just good to pick and choose our battles right now, and then try to solve small problems, and then eventually, cumulatively, we'll have a better understanding of it. So I'm hearing like in like a much smaller project needs to be thought through, and those vehicles just need to be honed in, and that's a separate question from what Alex is proposing in terms of like, okay, these more ambiguous, like these projects that can scale in a very different way, and they're complex because they're not really definable. Um, if it's helpful to Greg, we could have a template, but ultimately, I think Greg is our biggest filter anyway. So it's right now, maybe that's what we're just gonna have to acknowledge, that like there's going to be that human element that we're always going to rely on, and then that it's just going to be a suggestion list of like what we have seen for now, and that's all we probably will be likely be able to commit to right now. But I think as projects get more complex and we have more understanding of it, we can start thinking about layering in things so that that process, like setting that expectation, can be done a little bit earlier. That's all we can really do for complex projects like that.
I mean, I would love us to be getting more small proposals,
Right.
but I think we need to help the community know what we want to get.
Exactly. And that's what a
Yeah,
RFP would do.
yeah, yes, yes. I mean, few meetings ago, Bob and I talked about coming back to you all with an RFVP for innovation ideas, and we haven't come through with that. But I'm I remain very bullish on our putting out calls for proposal, and
Yeah.
I yeah, I we need to I want to I want to see how we can figure that one out.
Just out of curiosity, what's the current roadblock for that?
No, just that when we've been meeting, we've been focusing on other things. So it's that there's no roadblock besides
Time.
dividing and conquering,
Yep.
and putting in the time between meetings.
Okay.
Alex.
Yeah, I think in the interest of time and knowing we still need to open the floor for public comment and we have some other updates on our agenda, I'm going to suggest that we move on. I encourage folks to bring thoughts in whatever the next version of this looks like to them to future meetings so we can continue this. Based on what I've heard tonight, I don't think it sounds like we're ready to continue to flesh out this idea of a streamlined application. So I'm going to pause on that. I wanted to thank Greg for his help on this so far and for starting this conversation. And barring any objection, I'd suggest we move on.
I think that let's keep moving forward, and you've opened questions and put in analysis that we need to build on and reckon with. And I think we're all agreed that we want to get more proposals, and especially smaller ones. And so I would like to encourage everyone as well to think about which kind of proposal are you personally enthusiastic about, and would like to kind of spearhead, and I would like to support you, and I know Greg as well. So thank you very much, Alex. Thank you for always being so thoughtful and thorough. Um, I mean, I also feel like we're getting a lot. We're getting good rapport among us as a group, and that's very pleasing. At the same time, we're down 2 members, and so uh, I thought we could talk about what areas of expertise we might want to bring to our membership as a way of sparking ideas among us to invite people and recruit. In losing Robert Allingham, we lost someone who had a distinctively strong set of ties in the local business community. So I think that always made a lot of sense, and it would be great to find another member who would bring those ties. What other sorts of expertise or interests do you all think would be strong complements for our current membership? Or is anyone having ideas of someone in your network who you think would be a good fit for what we're trying to do here? Yeah, EJ.
I mean, I can talk about what I feel is my personal deficiency. I'm not only new to this board, but I'm also fairly new to Amherst, and I honestly just don't really have a good sense of what I feel that what could be useful to people in our community. So someone who just has a good feel for it, I think that's what I would really covet, that perspective. Um, that and just like a good logical sense of like, okay, we got this pie. We have this desire for an initiative for let's say emergency assistance. What is a logical amount to set aside as that for our 2026 spend for emergency assistance, let's say. Let's just call it like from that. Let's like I'm looking for someone who also likes to think in that direction.
Okay, well, I wonder if I should send out a call in the mailing list that we have for people in the community interested in affordable housing. Greg,
Yeah, if I could, maybe it'd be helpful to sort of offer sort of some town level context on the appointment process. All of you've gone through it, but it's been longer for some than others. Or the the way this works is that folks get appointed sometimes directly by Paul as town manager. Sometimes he makes a recommendation, and then the select board, or sorry, the town council approves. And then sometimes, I think in some cases, for a select set of these boards, the town council does it directly. Perhaps I forget how where there's a couple of them where they're more involved. But so Paul is kind of looking at a range of metrics, both, what these individual bodies need, but then also, some folks will apply generically and express interest in multiple bodies. And then he'll look at, well, who needs what, what's the mix of people on each body, making sure I think he's kind of focused on sort of diversity of experience and perspective and, background, all this stuff. So, um, uh, in, every year, and I'm in touch with them with the town manager's office about this. It seems like they're trying to be a bit more campaignish about the application period, and so I've requested explicitly that they keep me in the loop on the timeline for that. And so once I don't think there's a formal official period, but they're kind of creating a bit of an outreach period to sort of blitz communication and press releases and this kind of thing. So when that happens, is the time to spread the word, send to your network, because the way to sort of get folks plugged into this stuff is, especially if it's totally off their radar, is one, personal appeals, but two, like multiple touches help a lot as well. So when that kind of outreach campaign, that's my word, not theirs, but when that begins, I'll be sure to loop folks in. But yeah, but also I've communicated clearly that we are um, a little bit light right now as far as our overall team based on our core needs and whatnot. So that's um, I've named that.
All right, you want to follow through with town updates, Greg?
Yeah, sure. So we cover the big one, which is the CPA has made recommendations to the council, which will have to approve them in order to make them official. My understanding is generally council approves them, although this year they recommended some bonding, I believe, and that might be more of a significant uh, choice for the council. Um, so we got to wait to see what the council does. But at this stage, they recommended $325,000 to the trust, and also related to our efforts over the recent months, they recommended $450,000 as requested by ACLT to that project. So ACLT between our investment and CPAs has a good hunk of equity to move forward and seek a loan, construction loan. And it's my understanding that that outreach is underway. So that's kind of the exciting stuff around CPA. Regards to the ACLT, I've been in touch with Linda and a couple different folks on that team, and they are proceeding on pursuit of the first set of items we talked about last month. I've been in touch with them, and some of those are already checked off, which is great. And then and then otherwise we didn't meet that long ago. There haven't been uh, any huge developments. There is a proposed market rate development over in East Amherst, which I think maybe is not going before ZBA for a little bit, but keep your eyes peeled for that if you're interested. And then sorry, I lost my I think, yeah, and then the other another sort of town thing to note is some consideration of a historic district in East Amherst, along with some possible interest in rezoning there, which kind of goes hot and cold. But and then separately from that specific East Amherst area, the planning board is looking at strategies from the housing reduction plan and other sort of priorities they might have around their work this year. And some of those strategies might include targeted rezoning or I think they're looking at some changed definitions, although I'm not sure how real that is. But they might. I think they're looking at the possibility of changing apartment definitions to add the possibility of apartments that are above 24 units, which would be great. Yeah, so there's planning boards kind of creating their work plan for the year, and hopefully inspired by the HPP. I think those are the main town updates. Unless folks have any questions about other specifics.
Nothing new from Beacon?
No, nothing new from Beacon. So I'm not sure where that stands. I don't know that anybody is in the town staff at least.
Okay. Anybody have any other questions about town stuff? Well, we lost our one audience member, so I don't think we'll have any public comment. Are there any items not anticipated for the agenda that anyone would like to put up for discussion? All right, well, I guess we get a little bit of an early release. And I know Bob and I have a ecosystem meeting planned with Greg um, and Carla. I know you've been talking with Greg about um, Craig's doors. I don't know. Is there anything new on that front that
I think my what I was going to suggest, Greg, at some point we need to talk about meeting the new director because that's been a big change over there. So
Yeah, that's a great idea. And let's actually, and I hope to have some updates there in a month at our next meeting. Not so much about Craig's Doors, but about sort of homeless services in general. Um, but yeah, we can, Carl. Let's find some time to do that.
okay?
Yeah.
And why don't uh I guess it would be good, Greg, to give us all a nudge to go back to Alex's draft in like maybe 2 weeks, so that we can keep the conversation and the thought process moving.
For sure.
All right, folks. Thank you. It's good to see you. And whether we're agreeing or not, I'm very happy how we're getting to know each other as a group. And I look forward to us taking some concrete steps to um, solicit proposals and not just wait around for the next thing to show up. So hope you all enjoy slightly warmer weather this weekend. Good to see you. Good
All
night.
right, thank
You
you.
know,
Good
Right.
night.
Thank you.
thank you.